The Australian Financial Review.
This is my 60th annual meeting, and and it's the biggest, and I think it'll be the best yet. And
the world's most famous investor, Warren Buffett, is retiring at the end of the year. The 94-year-old made the announcement 2 Saturdays ago at his company's annual meeting in Omaha, Nebraska, which has become a pilgrimage for global shareholders. The very next day, across the country, Buffett's exit was analysed and debated by the financial elite in Beverly Hills. Politicians, financiers and celebrities gathered at the Milken Global Conference to hear Elon Musk talk, be reassured by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and rub shoulders with Rupert Murdoch. But at both events, there was a question hanging in the air. Is this peak America?
Everyone was very positive in public and on the panels very upbeat, but privately they were quite worried about where this was going. They were very worried about brand USA.
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. This week, senior reporter Jonathan Shapiro on Warren Buffett's legacy and whether his catchphrase, "never bet against America," still stands. It's Thursday, May 15. Hi, Johnny. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me on the show.
Johnny, you're just back from LA, where you attended the Milken Global Conference in Beverly Hills. Ooh la la. But before we get to that conference, let's talk about what happened right before it. Warren Buffett announced he would retire at the end of the year. You've been following him for most of your career. You've done the Omaha pilgrimage, I think, a couple of times.
Yes.
What was the response to the announcement that he would step down as CEO from Berkshire Hathaway?
if everyone will please take their seats.
Now, this meeting, which I was watching at some ungodly hour in Sydney, seemed like every other meeting. There were very useful insights and takes from Warren Buffett.
You don't want to be patient about acting on deals that make sense. And you don't want to be very patient with people that are talking to you about things that will never happen.
And I was actually getting ready to write an article, and I was just putting the finishing touches to my article, and then, there was a hush.
So I would now like to turn to a subject that I want to discuss with you a few minutes,
And that was when Warren Buffett announced that Greg Abel, his 2RC, would assume the role of CEO and officially be his successor.
The time has arrived where Greg should become the chief executive officer of the company at year end, and I want to spring that on the directors effectively.
Now, there had been plans for some time that, I think Greg Abel had been identified as Warren Buffett's replacement, but even he wasn't expected to be named as CEO that day. He was even caught by surprise. And that triggered an outpouring of emotion and an appreciation that we really were in an end of an era, not just for Berkshire Hathaway, but for Wall Street and for investing and for the capital markets. This was really a timestamp that an era had come to an end. Look, and at the end of the annual general meeting, Buffett pledged that he wouldn't be selling any of his shares in Berkshire Hathaway. Instead, he'd be giving them away.
I have no intention, zero, of selling one share of Berkshire Hathaway. It'll get given away gradually.
And we already know from what he said in the past that he plans to give away 99% of his wealth. His wealth now is worth about $160 billion US. So that impact will be felt for many years to come.
Johnny, you've been to the Omaha meeting a couple of times. Tell us about it.
It's an experience. Omaha itself, there's nothing too sort of exciting about it. It's a bit like a large country town. I guess maybe like Adelaide without the Adelaide Oval in the middle. But it's, it's a very lovely, genuine town. Lots of steakhouses, lots of little restaurants. It's very flat. I think it's on a prairie. There's a very unspectacular river that runs through it. And on the weekend of the Berkshire meeting, it's actually not that obvious that this meeting's going on, but, you run into investors from all around the world. And when I say investors, I mean anyone managing a huge $1 trillion pool of money to someone that's got maybe $10,000 in a share portfolio. And everyone there is very generous with their time. Everyone's curious. Everyone's friendly. What's great about it is no one there is there to get rich and to make money. Everyone's there because they love investing and they love, the process of investing.
People at the meetings don't just ask about investing. They actually ask about Warren Buffett's philosophy on life, about religion, all sorts of questions. They look to him for guidance. Why has he had such a huge impact?
Lisa, I guess to understand Warren Buffett and why he's so widely followed, it's probably a good idea to go back to the start. Now, he's a man from humble beginnings, and he sort of remains humble today. He was born in Omaha.
I went into business very early. I started selling Coca-Cola door to door. I sold gum door to door, or sold Saturday Evening Post, Liberty Magazine, Ladies' Home Journal, you name it.
He rarely leaves Omaha. He makes everyone come to him. He was always a very passionate, enthusiastic investor.
I was genetically blessed with a certain wiring that's very useful in a highly developed market system where there's lots of chips on the table. And, I happen to be good at that game.
He took control of Berkshire Hathaway, which was a sort of textile company in the mid-60s. It was going nowhere. I think it probably would have gone broke.
Well, Berkshire is a holding company of sorts.
And he turned it into a, giant investing conglomerate by, using Berkshire Hathaway to buy other companies, make more investments in private companies, in public companies.
It owns a large number of separate businesses that operate independently of each other and to a great extent from the parent company, Berkshire Hathaway.
And he just built this huge pool of assets that kept growing and compounding over time to be almost $1 trillion. So he sort of started out looking for undervalued companies, so he could pick up a annual report and see that particular company was grossly undervalued because its share price was $1 and its assets were probably worth $2, and it was very sort of simple, no-brainer exercise.
Some people are better at certain things than others. I'm better at making money than most.
But as time passed and as information was more freely available, these opportunities were harder to come by, and he had to be more thoughtful. And I think he credits Charlie Munger, his partner, for teaching him and encouraging him to look not for cheap, undervalued cigar butts, as he calls them, but these wonderful companies that will just keep making more money over time.
And the trick in investing is just to sit there and watch pitch after pitch go by and wait for the one right in your sweet spot. And if people are yelling, swing you bum, ignore them.
Over the years, he's invested in many businesses that we're all very familiar with, and I guess that's why he likes them, because we're familiar with them and their products. So things like Coca-Cola, that's probably one of his favorite investments.
We own 400 million shares of Coca-Cola stock, as you know. We've never sold a share, and I wouldn't think of selling it.
He invests in durable brands, that he believes have, enduring value. And he's clearly done well, but, he's made a lot of mistakes over the years. He's bought companies that haven't worked out, like Tesco, which is the UK supermarket company. He's been a bit hit and miss on tech. He bought into IBM, which has been a bit of a dog, to be frank. He's missed some great tech investments right under his nose. Like he struck up a very good friendship with Bill Gates, but he never bought into Microsoft.
Okay.
He has an insurance company that would have paid a lot of dollars to Google, to advertise and win customers, but he didn't invest in Google. Amazon is one he also feels like he missed out on. But you know what? Later in life, he did get one tech investment very right, and that's Apple. And it shows that like Warren Buffett didn't lose his touch. These years later, 2016, 2017, he had his eye on Apple and he started buying shares, and he has made an absolute fortune. I think he invested around $35 billion US buying shares in Apple, and that grew to about $173 billion. So it's right up there with some of the greatest finance trades of all time. But anyone that's been following the news over the last 12 to 18 months would have noticed that he's been selling. So he's been lightening his load of Apple shares, and Apple's had a bit of a correction, and Buffett, to his credit, managed to
pick it.
Avoid a lot of the fall in Apple by selling out close to the peak. So he's built this enormous pile of cash that now he says is there ready for the next opportunity.
So investors look to Buffett for direction, and as you said, in the last few years, he's been selling down that Apple stake. He's also been selling his shares in Bank of America. What does that tell us about his views on the American economy?
Well, whenever Warren Buffett's been asked about America, he's famously said to never bet against America.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the secret sauce, and it doesn't work all the time perfectly. But you just look at where we go milestone after milestone and never bet against America.
That's why all the money that Berkshire makes, it doesn't pay a dividend. He would rather just keep investing Berkshire's, proceeds of cash flows back into American companies and American businesses.
It does not make sense to bet against America. That doesn't mean all our policies are smart or anything, but I do not get pessimistic on the country.
The never bet against America mantra has certainly paid off. But, he's not immune from criticizing America, and he's had concerns about the deficit, America's debt levels for some time. He's a diehard capitalist, but he's been very critical of Wall Street in the past, and I guess he will never specifically mention Donald Trump, but he is worried about tariffs and protectionism. So he believes in America, but, he's not at all costs, and he does think that capitalism and the American way does attract a lot of scoundrels and self-promoters. But ultimately, he believes that, the dynamism and the innovation and to this day, if you'd asked him, I think he'd still struggle to find a better place to invest his capital and his money than in America. And for all the Buffett disciples that either dialed in or showed up in person to Omaha to hear Warren Buffett, if there was one thing they really wanted to get a handle on and to understand, it's this mantra of never betting against America. Is that still true? Should we retain our absolute faith that America is the best place to invest in? Every investor in the world is struggling with this question. Should they maintain their faith in America? Should they up their bets on America? So there are words and there are actions, and Buffett has been selling down his Apple stake substantially over the last 18 months, and also his shares in Bank of America. So it could be interpreted that he is softening his view that American exceptionalism will win the day.
So let's talk about the Milken Global Conference. You zipped off to LA, you attended. What is it and why were you there?
Well, Lisa, it was my first time. It was quite an incredible event. It's mainly an investment conference, but not solely an investment conference. There's a lot of broader themes that get explored there, and it's business, it's philanthropy, it's culture. If Davos is sort of the woke elitists, this is the hedge fund libertarians playground, and it was started by Michael Milken, and he's an interesting guy.
He is.
He is credited with creating the junk bond market. And it sounds worse than it is, but it really is companies that were a little bit riskier than others. They were never able to get financing other than from banks. And Milken came up with this idea that if the interest rate is attractive enough, people will be prepared to lend to risky companies, and created the junk bond or high yield market. And now it's about it.
This was in the 80s.
In the 80s. And now even today, it's a really important market that's used for a lot of private equity takeovers, or a lot of airlines that might not be considered like super high creditworthy can borrow money from the market. And it's been a great source of return for investors. But he's had an interesting career himself. He was caught up in a scandal and was made a deal with the SEC and accepted a 10-year jail sentence, for racketeering and fraud. Since he's come out of jail, he's devoted his life to philanthropy, medical research. He was pardoned in 2020, but today he's very much an influencer in finance through his conference, through his philanthropy. And this event is sort of his showpiece, where he gathers everyone together in Los Angeles and shares his ideas and gets everyone else to share theirs. And, and you've got America's biggest business leaders like Elon Musk opened the conference. People like Kevin Rudd, the US ambassador, former prime minister, walking around, having conversations on the sidelines. So you really do feel like you're at the center of power. And I went because I thought this is a huge moment in time.
It is,
Where is the world going? Where is global capital going? What are businesses thinking? And, if ever there was an opportunity to try and make sense of the world and get a jump on the direction of travel, we'd get it there. So, the first full day, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke, and, the line to get into this ballroom was snaking around. Like, you couldn't believe the queue just to get in and hear what he had to say. He really laid a blueprint around for why investors should trust America, why everything is going to work out, and why it'll come out on top. And he actually mentioned Warren Buffett's comments about never betting against America. He said the economy is unstoppable, and America will triumph at the end of the day, and it would be foolish to think otherwise. And that was really the theme of the conference. But what was fascinating is this divergence between what people were saying publicly and the concerns that they had behind the scenes. That was the point of tension at the event. Everyone in the room was still betting on America, but they were questioning the odds.
Johnny, we're talking about the Milken Global Conference that you went to in LA last week. It's become a fixture on the international financial calendar, and it was held this year just a day after Warren Buffett announced he was stepping down as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. One of your big takeaways was that while people were outwardly bullish about the US economy, privately they were really concerned about its direction and also its status as a safe haven. How did you pick up on that over the week?
Well, when I first arrived, the thing that struck me was how confident, everybody there was. Markets thrive on sentiment, and I guess much of the theme of the Milken event was to put forward a positive sentiment to retain faith in the US. Obviously, markets had quite a journey. In April, we had a very violent sell-off in stocks. The US dollar was very weak. The gold price went up. Yes, the markets had started to recover, but there were still a lot of reasons to be concerned. There were a lot of survey data coming out that showed that, Americans were losing confidence in Trump. Businesses were not investing. Consumers were cautious. The impact of tariffs was still quite unknown. Big retailers were warning of major disruptions. So there were a lot of reasons to be cautious. But at the event, everyone seemed to be taking their guide from the market recovery. And so everyone was very upbeat and confident. But again, what was interesting is at the end of the day, I guess all the journalists would find themselves at the same functions and we'd all trade notes. So there was New York Times, Bloomberg, and we all came to the same sort of conclusion that, everyone was very positive in public and on the panels very upbeat. But privately, they were quite worried about where this was going. They were quite worried about the impact of tariffs. They were very worried about brand USA, the faith of foreign investors in the US. I mean, the US has benefited greatly from foreign capital coming into the US. That's why they have the strongest and deepest capital markets. And one person more than anybody else who was prosecuting this debate that a lot of people didn't want to have was Michael Milken. So every opportunity that he was hosting a panel, he would really quiz all his panelists about the potential negative consequences of what was happening in the US. And then again, talking to some of the superannuation funds, they were saying that a lot of the big funds they met were also quite cautious. They were worried the changes that were being implemented were going to ultimately sap rather than introduce confidence into the US. So you did definitely have this dichotomy about what was being said in public and the conversations that were happening in private.
And Johnny, the conference was held before this week's trade truce. That was the 90-day pause announced by the US and China on those extreme tariff increases. Will that announcement address some of these concerns?
To be frank, I think it does address much of the anxiety that was created in the last few weeks. And I think now we can appreciate that the Trump administration does have its limits. They are pragmatic, and we're probably less likely to live in a totally bipolar world. But with that aside, there are lingering concerns. If you're a business or a big global investor or a government, this has made you realize that there are risks about being all in on America, especially if your interests and theirs diverge. And in the long run, I think there will be a strategic reconsideration as to how much is invested in America.
So while you were at the conference, what was it that people were really pinning their hopes to? And on the other hand, what were they most concerned about?
Lisa, the takeaway I got from sort of immersing myself in this event for 3 days is trying to understand what America's strengths are. And I guess if there's two that are prominent, it's human capital. So the talent that America sucks in, not just that it develops itself, but that it pulls from the rest of the world through its education system, through its ability to create wealth, is one of its strengths. The other is financial capital. It attracts investors from around the world. So as was often stated at a lot of the panels, America now accounts for 70% of the global share market index. And that's purely because its companies have been better than companies in the other parts of the world. So they've grown by a faster amount and they've come to be a greater share of the share market index. And that in turn has attracted more capital from all around the world and has made the American financial system the strongest, most durable system in the world, which, provides cheap capital to American companies so that they can grow. And that's funded a lot of innovation through things like venture capital, innovation in Silicon Valley. We've had the artificial intelligence revolution that America's been at the forefront of, and China is playing catch up and is not as far behind as America as people think. And that's maybe a check to this whole idea of American exceptionalism, that the rest of the world is willing to compete. But yeah, it's the human capital, the financial capital, which has then in turn developed and financed innovation. And that's really, I guess, what has made America an exceptional country. The concern is what the current administration might do to threaten those key strengths. So there is a bit of a crisis in the higher education. Trump's threatened to pull funding from some of the elite universities. What does that mean? Does it discourage more foreigners from coming to America? The point that was made is that two of the greatest innovators and CEOs in recent times, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA and Elon Musk of Tesla, both were not born in America. They both came to America because it was, the place that could fulfill their dreams. So is there anything that is happening now that maybe prevents the next Elon Musk or Jensen Huang from coming to America? Maybe they go somewhere else and maybe they develop a great company in another country. So, that's interesting. But then to Milken's credit, he's actually looking at America's problems in health and education and wondering, what should we do to make America better? And interestingly, he's an admirer of Australia's superannuation system. Okay. He is worried that not enough young Americans have money in investments. So, and it came from a conversation he had with a cab driver when he came to visit Australia last year. He realised how financially secure a middle-class Australian was compared to their US equivalent. He thought the Australian superannuation system is something that America should probably replicate. And they're floating this idea, which might come to fruition in the next couple of months, is where every American born from now on gets $1,000 to invest in the share market. My understanding is that it might be announced as part of Donald Trump's Big Beautiful Bill, which might come out on July 4th, but that will only apply to Americans born from next year. And then there is a push for donors to make sure that every American under the age of 10 has an account. So that would require some private capital.
So, Johnny, you spent 3 days at the conference listening to America's best and brightest. What do you think about this idea of never betting against America? Do you think it still holds, or are investors, super funds, private equity firms and governments around the world having to come up with a different strategy?
Well, Lisa, if I can channel my inner Warren Buffett, he always says that everything has a price. It's all about the price you pay and the value you get. And one of the debates at the event was, America is all these things. It is a wonderful place. It is most likely to be exceptional. But does it have to be even more exceptional to justify, the cost of entry? So American companies, are they too expensive? Is the US dollar overvalued and likely to fall? And are other countries going to become maybe not as exceptional as the US, but more exceptional than they are now relative to the US? And as an investor, that means you're probably better off putting your money elsewhere if other countries play catch up. So I guess to sit on the fence a little bit, it seems like there's very little that can stop America from, being a world leader in innovation, in financial markets and attracting the best and brightest. But we might see the rest of the world closing the gap, and maybe the rise of Donald Trump is an impetus for that. So one topic that kept coming up as well was Europe is prepared to spend more. The governments are prepared to open their checkbooks and invest in innovation, in defence. So we might see more opportunities and more animal spirits spread across the world. China obviously has a need to catch up too. So it's hard to see America being surpassed, but we might see opportunities in other countries. And I think that was a lot of the sentiment that was relayed throughout the 3 days.
And finally, I want to take you back to Warren Buffett. What happens at Berkshire Hathaway now? And will there ever be another Buffett?
Well, Lisa, I think Berkshire Hathaway is in good hands. Warren Buffett has been very thoughtful in his succession. He's promoted Greg Abel, who's going to be the new CEO, is going to take over from him for a number of years. And even that great Apple investment that we were talking about earlier, if you read the genesis of it, it was two investment managers that he hired, Todd Combs and Ted Weschler, who came up with the idea, and Buffett backed them. So it wasn't entirely Buffett. So I think if you are a shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway, you probably have a lot of confidence that there are very, excuse the pun, able hands there to look after it. But I think what it means for people like myself, all the disciples of Warren Buffett that have, for the last 30 years, relied on him as a genuine father figure. I mean, even in these uncertain times, people were hanging out for this meeting to hear what Warren Buffett had to say about America, to give them hope, to give them faith, to give them belief that everything was going to be okay, because without Buffett saying that, people were really, really a little bit lost. And so will there be another Warren Buffett? To be honest, I actually don't think there will be. He was a very unique person. The thing about Warren Buffett is, much like how he ran his investments, he was very slow and patient, and he built up this personality slowly over time, by doing the right thing over and over again. And I think in this day and age, it's just very different. Followers come and go. Things are a lot quicker and faster, and it just doesn't seem like an environment that's, conducive to a person or a personality of like Warren Buffett. So I think we just have to accept that we are entering a very new and different age, and we'll all have to find our own Warren Buffett types that we can follow and trust.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray, with Financial Review senior reporter Jonathan Shapiro joining the podcast today. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow. Lap Fan is head of podcast. Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and consider rating and reviewing us, as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.